I realized the other day that I've been in the photography industry for over a decade, and during that time, it doesn't seem like our prices have increased that much. But everything else has: our software costs, the number of subscriptions we have, now there's ad spend, outsourcing, and our cost of living has gone up dramatically in 10 years. And yet, so many photographers are still undercharging. In this episode, I want to talk about why charging $5,000 per elopement should be the bare minimum if you actually want to run a profitable, sustainable elopement photography business in 2025 and beyond. Welcome to Stoked, the podcast that helps adventure elopement photographers hit six figures and beyond in their businesses without hustling on social media. I'm your host, Megan McPhail, a former burnt-out emergency veterinarian that quit my hard-earned career to become an elopement photographer. Now I'm living a life I absolutely love, full of travel, adventure, and financial abundance, and I am hell-bent on helping you do the same. Are you ready to start booking out your calendar with dream couples in breathtaking locations and feeling genuinely stoked about your elopement photography business, life, and bank account? Then let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, it's your host, Megan McPhail.
And your co-host, Todd Reedy.
Today, we're going to talk all about pricing your elopements. And I kind of want to have a conversation on money as well, because I was just thinking the other day how I've been in the wedding and elopement industry, the photography industry, for over a decade now. And I feel like people are still charging the same amounts for their services as they were a decade ago. And we really need to have this conversation that we need to up our prices and why we need to up our prices. So back in 2013, I was living a different life. This was pre-Todd. I booked a wedding photographer for $4,700. And that price was very normal at the time. Almost all photographers were charging in the 4,000s. And it just feels like that has not changed that much. And I've noticed that, second shooters are being compensated about the same hourly rate that they were a decade ago, and associate shooters are getting paid the same rate as a decade ago. It just seems like things haven't improved. And if you think about what $4,700 was 12 years ago, it's like the equivalent of $6,200 today. So that just accounts for inflation. And I would not say that it's totally normal to peruse the internet and find wedding photographers at the $6,000 mark, whereas at the $4,000 mark was very, very normal and continues to be normal. And I think that needs to be increased.
And because I like data, I just looked up. So the average, so this is average, and this is for wedding photography. So the average cost of wedding photography over the last decade. So back in 2014, the average cost was $2,500.
Mm-hmm.
And then the average cost now in 2025, well, this data is for 2024, but $2,900. So only has increased a little bit, which is definitely not kept up with inflation.
Yeah, and it hasn't kept up with the rising costs of running a business because of all the subscriptions that we have and the fact that you really have to be running ads to get booked out. And, a lot of people end up outsourcing things that they don't enjoy, like editing or blog writing or VA type stuff, So it doesn't take that into account. So if you've been following me for any period of time, after doing hundreds of cost of doing business spreadsheets and seeing, what photographers should be charging, it's almost always at least $5,000. And that's so that you can profit 30%. And then if you want to profit more like 50%, we're talking about $6,000, $7,000. So really, this $5,000 that I kind of promote on my social media and in my marketing is the bare minimum that I want people charging in order to be profitable, but not even that profitable, So really, we're looking at $6,000 or $7,000 as what you should be charging, which I think $5,000 has scared people for a long time. A lot of people think that's insane. And then here I am going to say $6,000 or $7,000 should really be what you're aiming for, even $8,000, even $10,000. And I know like Todd is more recent into this world. You've still been in it for a while now, since like 2020. So you're not that new, but he still has that kind of like perspective where he came from a place where he thought charging $2,000 was too much for his videography services.
Yeah. And even being in this industry and like being a videographer, being a photographer, running the numbers, running a business and seeing all the cost of business spreadsheets, like you said, 5,000 is still like a scary number to me. That's just a lot of money, but it's not that much for a lot of different people. Like I know we've talked about money mindset and I still struggle with money mindset issues, but there are so many people in this country and the world that make a gross amount of money. Like, and $5,000 is literally nothing. So the people are out there, they have the money and like our services are worth it.
Yeah. And like we can't project our own money issues onto our couples. And I think there's a lot of reasons why people undercharge and they think $5,000 is crazy or even, higher than that or even that $4,000 is crazy. And I think one of the things is fear of rejection. And I think a lot of photographers have faced a lot of rejection and a lot of people have been vocal and told them your prices are too high. But you're going to hear that no matter how cheap you are. Like you're going to hear that if you're charging $500 for elopements. People are going to say you're too expensive. Like that just is what it is. And you're going to get more no's than yeses too. I think that's something people struggle with is like every inquiry that comes in, people want to book it. And some people aren't getting a lot of inquiries. So like that one inquiry is really important, but you're going to hear more no's than yeses. You're going to get more people ghosting you than booking you. So that's kind of part of it. But you develop this fear of rejection. And if people aren't booking you at your existing prices, how in the world are you supposed to raise them? But when people are looking for like this once in a lifetime service, I mean, yes, they have budgets, just like how some people can only afford a $200,000 house and some people are looking at $1 million houses, right? And then there's everything in between. But like, you just can't assume other people's financial situations. If you assume that they're all millionaires, then it makes life a little bit easier than assuming that everybody's broke and looking for a deal when it comes to photography, because a lot of people are not looking for a quote unquote good deal.
Yeah. And I think when you're thinking about kind of like the wedding space and elopements, right? Like kind of people have this idea that, yeah, people are going to be spending a lot of money for weddings and that they're going to choose to elope because it's going to save them money. But for all the couples that have hired us and probably all of the other couples that we talk to that don't end up booking us, when we ask the question like, hey, why are you eloping and not having a big wedding? I mean, it's not to save money, right? It's because they don't want to be the center of attention. They don't find value in spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or even tens of thousands of dollars on like feeding a massive wedding party and things like that. So there is a group of people that value photography and the experience of this elopement. And those are the ideal couples that we want to be booking and working with.
Yeah. And they're looking for photographers that are charging higher prices. So sometimes, and I've seen this firsthand, couples aren't reaching out to certain photographers because the quality of their work doesn't match up with the low price they're charging. So they lose trust there and like the couples are like, what's going on?
Yeah. And I think that we've probably given this example about like when we've talked about pricing, about like, say, if you go to a fancy restaurant or just any restaurant and they have a bottle of wine that's cheap, one that's in the middle and one that's more expensive, right? Kind of the psychology between the three pricing and how they'll gravitate towards the middle one.
For a special event, yeah, I'm not going to get the cheapest wine. But if it's like just a random Wednesday evening and we decided to go out to dinner because we didn't feel like cooking, I might go for the
inexpensive
cheapest
bottle,
glass,
And,
but not on like our wedding day,
and
or celebrating.
Yeah, and kind of that idea that the lower price has a lower value or has a lower quality. So if you're pricing yourself very cheaply or inexpensively for wedding or elopement photography, yeah, our clients or potential clients going to see that low number and be like, well, there's probably a reason why they're only charging $1,000 or $1,500. Like, are they new? Are those photos actually theirs? Like, will they show up? So like, I think there is this inherent value in a higher price. Maybe that's just what I'm trying to tell myself as someone who charges a lot for our services.
Yeah, no, there is. Just like I got a purse from Target at one point for $30. That thing got shoved in closets. It got put on the ground. My dogs probably chewed on it, all kinds of things. I didn't take care of it, right? Because it was so cheap. But then you get a nice purse and suddenly you're not just shoving it into closets and letting it touch the dirty ground, like you're taking care of it. And like, that's really kind of what we're helping our couples with. They're truly investing in something. And when you invest in something, you treasure it. And I see it all the time where couples that are cheaping out on their elopement and they don't trust their photographer because they're cheap and they give their photographer a hard time and they micromanage and all this kind of stuff. And like if it's windy or it's rainy, they get upset instead of flowing with it, and having a good time anyway. Whereas like our couples, and we just had a couple like this where they only ended up hiring us for 4 hours, but it was a $6,000 package. And they just trusted us completely. They pretty much handed off all the major decisions to us and they just kind of showed up on the day. And they loved every minute of it. They did not micromanage us at all. And they even gave us a tip at the end and some cake, So like, it's just a completely different clientele. And if you're used to working with people at lower prices, it can be really hard to understand that this other world exists. And you might feel like you're not allowed to be in that world. You're not allowed to charge more, especially if you're comparing yourself to other people. You might be looking at their prices and kind of basing your price off of theirs, maybe a little less to be like quote unquote competitive, but no one else knows what they're doing. Don't base your prices off of other photographers. If anything, charge more. And, a lot of people have a lot of limiting beliefs that keep them from charging more, but you deserve to be profitable. Like, what other businesses are there out there where people don't charge to be profitable right off the bat? Every company out there is trying to make a profit immediately, but for some reason, photographers act like we have to get more experience and struggle. And that's a big American thing, cultural thing, is you got to struggle for your money and like,
Yeah, the starving artist.
yeah. And like pay your dues and stuff like that. And if you want more, you're being greedy and you're taking money from people and stuff. And like, none of that is true. In fact, if you charge more, not only are you getting better clients, but you can serve them better because you have money, because you have time to rest, because you're not overbooking yourself, because you have some kind of financial stability and you're not just like in survival mode all the time. And like people will pay for that.
So I want to dig here a little bit because when I first started with video, one, it was, pretty similar to photography, like with the kind of services and like what the deliverables were. But like I really struggled with what to make my pricing, right? Mm-hmm. So like my very first one was obviously, or I did for free. And then like we came up with a couple at 500 and then we kind of continued to ramp up my prices. But yeah, I didn't know what to charge. I'm trying to think of like a new photographer listener. How do you go about like making these decisions on what to start with? Say it's your very first wedding or like, this is kind of the path I want to go down. Like, are there milestones or benchmarks or like, how would you go about like starting a pricing structure and then like ramping it up to making profit?
Well, I would first like to say that there are no milestones or benchmarks or things you have, like, there's no one out there that's going to give you permission. You just do what you need to do, or I am giving you permission to charge more. How about that? Because I feel like, some people get into Facebook groups or have a mentor that really isn't about helping people and is actually more about gatekeeping, or people give them a hard time about raising their prices. And there's just literally no benchmarks or milestones. Like, you should be profitable. You shouldn't be paying to run your business. You shouldn't be in the negative. Like, there are going to be years where you're not super profitable, because you are investing in more gear or a new computer, or you have to build more of a portfolio, or you're doing education or whatever it is, like I wasn't immediately profitable in my business, but like that has to be a focus, if this is truly going to be a business and not just a hobby that you're just like happy to get a few $100 for like a wedding or something. If you really truly want to be a business owner, yeah, there's no one that's going to swoop in and be like, you should charge more.
Yeah, your clients definitely are going to be like, oh, I see your price is XYZ. You should probably charge more because
Yeah.
you're so much better than that.
Yeah, exactly. Like that day is not going to come. You're not going to get a day where suddenly people aren't saying you're out of budget. You're always going to have that. So, really, what it comes down to is your cost of doing business is one of the major things you need to know, because that will also kind of help your mindset, which is another thing. Because once you realize you're actually losing money on this business venture and that you could just not be working at all and be more in the positive, that kind of changes things for people. But like your mindset is another huge thing, because I think that's really what people need to work through in order to raise their prices, is like, what lies are they telling themselves about money? You know, like what trauma do you have to work through about money? If you get on a phone call with a couple and you like literally, you're like breaking out into hives over saying your price on the phone, like that doesn't serve anybody. And then your local market, like I want you to know, kind of have an idea of what the prices are in your local market, but not so that you can undercut them. So you can be towards the top. Supply and demand is another one. So I see people all the time who are like, oh, I'm all booked out for 2026 or something like that. And it's like, whoa, you should not be booked out for 2026, at least not as an elopement photographer. Like, that's a huge sign that you should be raising your prices. And like, you're not doing anybody any favors by overbooking yourself. So just so you can be like, I have triple header weekends. You can book like 20 things and make a shit ton of money. And then like the value you bring as well is something that you should consider with your pricing. And like everyone has value to bring, not just like, oh, I've shot 100 elopements or I've traveled all over the world or something. Like your personality brings value, your past experiences bring value, the way you see light and you pose people and you plan elopements and all those things bring value. So don't discount that. But those are the things I have people working through. And that's why they're able to hit $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 like their first friggin' year in business, because they're not asking permission except from me. And I'm like, yes, do it. You know, they're working through their limiting beliefs. They're working on their client experience and all that kind of stuff. They're building their portfolio so they can go in and be confident and kind of get rid of this imposter syndrome feeling. They understand how this all works. So it took me, I need to figure out how long it actually took me, because sometimes I say 4 years, sometimes I say 5 years, but either way, it took me a long ass time by myself to figure out how to price even over $4,000 for an elopement. And you don't have to wait that long. You can start doing it like tomorrow.
Yeah, you deserve to be profitable running a business, right? You're adding skill, your personality, all of this gear, all this time. Like, yeah, you should be making a profit running your business, just like every other successful business, right? So yeah, you got to charge what you're worth and what your value is.
Yeah, that's why I brought up like hiring that photographer back in the day for $4,700, because yeah, things have just kind of stagnated, and I want people to know like 6,000 should be what we're aiming for. And if that makes you really nervous and concerned, like, why is that? Like, you should work through that, you know, like we need to help you through that, because yeah, there's just so many business expenses, and yeah, we should be profitable. So next episode, we'll be talking more about what's included in these huge packages and like the client experience that you'll give people, because it is a little more than what people might be used to as far as like what we offer our couples and why we charge what we charge and why my coaching students can charge what they charge. We do go a little extra, but it's not like earth-shattering stuff, you know, like really the value truly comes down to us as photographers and people wanting to hire us, and like that comes at a cost, you know?
Yeah, and we'll get into it more next episode, but like, yeah, that client experience is more than just the photographer showing up, taking photos for 8 hours and grabbing your piece of cake and peacing out.
Yeah.
Like kind of the classic, maybe wedding type photographer or low end or inexpensive wedding photographer, right?
Yeah.
So like we'll go into it, but like there's planning, and like we as elopement photographers are crafting this experience, right? We're the photographer, yes, but we're also the guide, the expert about everything, which we'll go into next episode.
Yeah.
I don't want to spill the beans here.
Yeah.
you probably know it, but like trying to pitch that and like trying to relay that value is also part of the battle too. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's also why a lot of my coaching students start charging more for elopements than they ever charged for weddings. And I think that's common where people think like, oh, I charge this much for weddings, money's in weddings, I'm charging less for elopements. And that's just not what we teach here or what we see. Like they find it easier to make big bucks with elopements than with weddings. So cool. That was a fun episode. Hopefully it changed your perspective on some things. I do have a pricing online course that you can take called Price It Right. That includes cost of doing business, what you should be charging for elopements, including the packages, how to raise your prices, how to communicate your value on your pricing page, all that good stuff. We'll plug it in the show notes. So if you want to get started on that, it's what people have used to, hit six figures in my program. So cool. Talk to you later. Thanks so much for joining us on this week's episode of Stoked. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. If you're looking for more inspiring elopement photography content, check us out on Instagram at Megan McPhail. And if you'd like to hear more about my business coaching and how I can personally help you hit six figures as an elopement photographer, then check out my website at www.meganmcphail.com.